Okay, today what I wanted to show is using Alpine, which is a type of Linux, as a Docker host. So Alpine, I've talked before previously on the channel. I'll just open a new browser. Florp. But Alpine Linux is a very lightweight, easy to navigate Linux distribution, which is really good for the server. The downloads for Alpine are incredibly small, and the entire project is also very up to date. Alpine often gets used with Docker, but not as a Docker host. It often is the target when trying to build, say, some sort of service or container, which is going to be run in Docker because Alpine is such a small, has such a small footprint to begin with. So the container image is ridiculously small, and even a full install of Alpine is very small. So what I wanted to show you is the whole process, building or installing Alpine in a virtual machine, setting up Docker, and then time allowing, try to do a Nextcloud bring up using the Docker host on Alpine. So first I'm going to go to my virtual machine, going to create a new one. This is using the QEMU KVM virtual hypervisor on Linux. You could use VirtualBox if you're using like Windows, Mac OS, or Linux as well. I just prefer this, so this is Virt Manager. What we're going to do is we're going to go look for our image, which should be in Downloads. And we're going to take the latest Alpine standard, choose, and then it doesn't detect automatically, so we can just feed it Alpine. And the reason is this version of Virt Manager or the QEMU doesn't have the latest, most up-to-date version of Alpine. So we just pick something close. We go forward. The memory, just for demoing, we'll say we'll do 2 gigs, and we'll bump it up to 2 CPU cores. So, but you can see that the system expects a very low footprint for an Alpine build, but because we're going to be putting Docker and installing other containers, which might be Debian based, might be Alpine based, whatever. So we're going to just bump this up a little bit. And then for the disk space, yeah, we'll bump this up. For now, just 20 gigs. You could give it whatever you want. Then you can go forward, and then we'll call this Docker Alpine 2. For now, I think I got another one in on my system, so we'll do this. And at this point, we're creating the virtual machine. Make this full screen. So here, Alpine's already booted. You can actually see that the kernel, by default, the login you'll want to log into as root. It doesn't ask for a password because this is actually sort of like the live USB edition. This is before we've actually installed it. So you can see that there's a line, 2 lines up that says you can set up the system with command setup Alpine. So that's what we'll run. And then we'll just say we're going to use the US keyboard, US, enter system. Yeah, we can just go with the default localhost. We'll just go with the default. Go with the default. You see the defaults are always in brackets after they ask you the question, so you can just hit enter to go through. And we'll just add a password for this. I know it's a weak password, but this is just demo. Then we say no proxy. We'll just find the fastest mirror. So this is the mirror is where we get all of our packages for Alpine. And basically what it's doing is it's doing a ping test to find which server is the fastest. You don't have to do this. You can also just go with the default of the first mirror on the list. And we can set up a user. We're just going to skip that for right now. We are going to use OpenSSH. type yes for allow password just to make it simple. Again, this isn't going to be a production system. And it shows or prompts you for which dist you want to install to, and it shows you the available dist. You just type in the dist name, which is VDA. And then we're going to set this as sys. If you want to see the options, you can just press the question mark. But it basically explains to you that if you're installing this as a traditional system, then you're using this setup Alpine. Setting this will create a system partitions for the disk. You'll have your boot and your root menus. If you're doing data, then this might be something where if you're running something like tempfs, or if you're just adding like another drive, those would be different options. We're just going to type in sys and do the defaults. And then out of caution, the default question when it comes to formatting the drive is, or the default answer is no, but we're going to go ahead and type yes because we do want to install the operating system to the disk. So now it's going to go and format the virtual drive that we just gave it. And that's all there is to it. So now we can reboot Alpine. Just type reboot. Okay. So now the virtual machine is booting in. We can log in as root and the password we gave, and we're in. So now from here we can see the drives. Oh, it doesn't like the H. Oh, it doesn't like the L. Just run the df command. You can see the drive layouts over here. So you have the VDA3 and then two partitions. So one is the boot, one is the root. And you can see how much space we're actually using. And you can see that of the 20 gigabytes that we gave it, we're using about 1%. Okay. Another thing that we can do is we can start adding packages. But before I do that, I do want to use SSH. So let's just really quickly do an IPA so we can see the IP address. Okay, so it's the 192.168.122.205. So what we'll do is SSH root at 192.168.122.205, and I can make this a bit bigger. And we'll trust the key, type in the password, and we can df again. Who am I? And we can start adding packages. So we can do apk add htop. So that's installed really fast. You can look at htop and you can see how much resources we're using. We're using a whopping total of 92.6 megabytes with htop running. So again, very small, and one of the reasons why I like Alpine. Then what we're going to do is install Docker and Docker Compose. So we go cd etc, do an ls. We can see there's this apk over here. We can actually just close this window. There's the apk, so we cd into apk, do another ls. We have this repositories. So we're going to edit that in Alpine. By default, it doesn't have nano, I don't think. It does not found, but we can vi, which is fine. And there's the main and then community. What we want to do is uncomment community. So because we're using vi, we press I to insert, delete the comment, press escape, and we're going to wq exclamation point. Now we're going to apk update, and it's going to bring down everything. And now we install Docker, which is insanely easy. Oops, just need to do an add Docker and Docker Compose. So now Alpine's going to go through and it's going to go do all of that. So in the way they have it packaged in Alpine makes it very simple. Normally you have to add a whole bunch of packages and add the repo, like if you're using Ubuntu or some other distribution. But in Alpine it's in the community and they have a meta package of this Docker, so you can just say add Docker and all of the dependencies like containerd, etc. All of that's going to come down natively to the Alpine stack. And the project is really quite up to date. So you saw it's already on kernel 6.12, which is one of the newest kernels in Linux right now. And what I'll try to do in the blog post is add some updates as to why 6.12 is so cool. Okay, great. So now we have Docker, and we can just do Docker help. Yes, it's indeed working. So let's try to actually install something. So what we'll do is go to my GitHub page, and we'll try to bring up Nextcloud. So what we can do is, actually we can just copy and paste. So we can just copy this raw file and then cd, and we're going to vi docker compose.yaml, insert, control shift v, and we're going to change some of this. We're going to need a data directory for Nextcloud. We're going to need a db directory. This is if you want to make everything permanent, and I'm going to change the name. I'm just going to call this Nextcloud DB. Oops. And the MariaDB Nextcloud now can support a much higher version of MariaDB, so I'm going to go up to 11. This by default will take in the latest. So I'm going to change the name, and you can change the names to whatever you want to call your containers. And then this is running on port 8080, which is fine. We could even just make it simpler and have it run on port 80 of the host port, because again we're just using this VM as a sort of blowaway VM. And then we have a Redis host, which is also built on Alpine, so it's Redis, the Alpine variant, and that's fine. So once we have all of this set up, we can just escape, WQ exclamation point. We can cat out the Docker compose, and we can see everything is set up the way we want, but we do need to give it two directories. So we got this Nextcloud DB, we got this Nextcloud. So we got to make two directories. We got to make a data directory, and we got to make a data DB directory. Okay, so that should jive with everything we need. And now all we have to do is run a docker compose up -d. So -d means it's detached, so you don't have to have the running process in the foreground of this terminal, which means you can exit the terminal and the Docker containers are still going to run. So we're just going to do this. Okay. I made a note of this. One thing we gotta do is there's an RC update, and we gotta do RC update Docker. What that's gonna do is it's gonna add Docker to our runtimes. Docker D. What is it? Gotta drop to my notes. Okay, it's missing the add. So we gotta do RC update add Docker, and then we can do service Docker start. So now we're running the Docker daemon, and now we should be able to run the Docker compose. So now everything's pulling, and another cool thing, or what I think is kind of cool, is it has this nice little animation when it's doing the bring up. So there's a lot of nice sort of quality of life parts when dealing with Docker on Alpine. So you can sort of see the progress as it comes down. And I'll speed this up. And there we should have everything working, so we can do Docker PS to see what's running. And we got the 3 containers that we defined in the Docker Compose file. So we got Nextcloud, Nextcloud DB, Nextcloud Redis. We can actually see what's in the data directory. And indeed, we got Nextcloud, essentially. So we got the OCC commands, we got all of the things required. And again, we can check our IP. Well, we got a lot more IPs now because of the Docker. But we can use our main IP. And we can go over and we can try to log in. So this is a new Nextcloud. We can create an admin user. Give it a password. And it always takes a minute on the first login because it needs to set up the user and finally connect the database and everything. So now Nextcloud is prompting us to downloaded recommended apps. We can skip this for now. And there we have it, a full Nextcloud install running on this here Alpine VM. So quick tutorial. I really like just how light Alpine is. If we go back to the terminal, even with the Docker now running, we can check our HTOP again, and we're using around 511 megabytes of resources. A lot of that is cached, so we're actually not using quite as much. But part of that is caching. The Redis server may also be one of the culprits for why that's sort of creeping up a little bit higher. But very easy to just set up, use, get started with, and it's very lightweight. And for me personally, while of course I could always run Docker on my host system, and in fact I do for certain things, I like having Docker in virtual machines, particularly if I'm doing any web server work, like web server hosting in the case of Nextcloud, because that way I have sort of a dedicated test IP, and I can have multiple different versions going at the same time. And Alpine is just so quick to install, and makes for a really easy Docker deployment. So I just found it useful over the past few weeks, month or so, and I just wanted to share. So thank you very much.